I didn't meet Resident Evil the way most people did. I didn't see the intro first. I didn't step into the mansion slowly. I didn't hear the dogs crash through the window and jump out of my skin. I met it at the end. I was 6 years old, sitting right at the edge of the sofa in my brother's friend's house, watching a game I didn't really understand yet. On the screen was daylight, not darkness, not rain, not safety, but the illusion of it. The mansion was behind them, the sky was open. It looked like escape, and then something burst through the calm and shattered it completely. The Tyrant. I didn't know its name. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know why it was there. I just knew I'd never seen anything like it in a video game before. This wasn't a monster popping out of a level. This wasn't a boss area. This was the game lying to you for a moment, letting you believe you were safe, and then reminding you that you weren't. I remember looking at my brother, then back at the screen, already aware, at 6 years old, that this was changing something in my head, because this didn't feel like the games I knew. I'd already seen violence in games. Mortal Kombat had already shown me blood, fatalities, spectacle, but this wasn't spectacle. This felt serious, grounded, oppressive, like the game didn't care how old I was or whether I was ready for it. And the strangest part, it wasn't years later that I finally played it. The moment I saw it, I wanted it. I didn't need convincing. I didn't need reviews. I didn't need magazines or demo discs. I already knew Resident Evil didn't invite me gently. It showed me the consequences first, and then it waited for me to catch up. Welcome to the PSX Index. I'm Parasine, and this is where everything started. Before I ever played Resident Evil, I already understood violence in games. Mortal Kombat had prepared me for blood. Street Fighter had prepared me for impact. Cartoons had prepared me for the exaggerated pain that didn't really mean anything. Violence was familiar, fear wasn't. Resident Evil wasn't scary because it was gory. It was scary because it was quiet, because nothing explained itself, because the game didn't perform for you. It waited, and it started that way immediately. Before the mansion, before the zombies, before you'd even touched the controller, there were real people on screen, not animations, not polygons, actors, running through fog, shouting names you didn't recognise, falling over, screaming, black and white, low contrast, awkward, almost cheap. And at 6 years old, that mattered, because my brain didn't separate game from real yet. It didn't analyse production value or tone. It just saw people in danger. That intro didn't feel like fiction. It felt like footage, like something that had already gone wrong before you'd arrived. And what's strange now, looking back, is knowing these people were just actors. Ordinary people doing a small job, probably thinking nothing of it. And decades later, they're being recognised, interviewed, celebrated, not because their acting was perfect, but because they were part of something that stuck. That intro wasn't polished, it wasn't cinematic, it was uncomfortable, and that's exactly why it worked. It told you right away that this game wasn't interested in entertaining you, it wanted to unsettle you. Even before I played it myself, the game was already working on me. I remember going to bed after watching my brother play it and not wanting to walk past the window in the hallway. Not because my imagination was inventing things, but because I'd already seen it happen. I'd watched dogs smash through windows in the game. I'd seen the glass explode inward. I'd seen how sudden it was, how unfair it felt. So when I walked past that window on the second floor at night, that fear wasn't symbolic. It was practical. My 6-year-old brain didn't understand scripted scares or design tricks. It just knew that windows weren't safe anymore. That's the difference. Resident Evil didn't suggest danger, it demonstrated it. Once you've seen something like that happen, your imagination doesn't need encouragement, it just waits. Other games at the time filled every gap. Music everywhere, bright colours, constant motion. Resident Evil left space. Space for silence, space for dread, space for the feeling that something was wrong nearby, even if you couldn't see it. And because I didn't have the language to explain any of this, it slipped past logic and lodged somewhere deeper. That wasn't fear I could reason with. It wasn't fear I could turn off. It was just there. The mansion didn't feel like a level. It felt like a place where violence had already happened. Bodies on the floor, blood on the walls, locked doors everywhere. Not puzzles, yeah, not mechanics, just evidence. And that's why this hits different to Mortal Kombat or horror films. Those were spectacles. This was a space that didn't care how old I was, a space that didn't slow down for me, a space that didn't explain itself. And when I finally did start playing, sat on the floor because the controller cable didn't quite reach the sofa, that fear didn't disappear, it just became my responsibility. The Spencer mansion didn't feel big because it was large. It felt big because it didn't want you there. Every door was locked. Every corridor doubled back on itself. Every key felt like it belonged somewhere you hadn't found yet. At 6 years old, this wasn't a puzzle box. It was a maze. Not the kind of maze where you pull up a map and optimise a route. The kind where you weren't even sure you'd seen anything. Rooms didn't feel optional. They didn't feel like side content. They felt undiscovered. Just finding a new door felt like progress. Opening one felt like a reward. Unlocking a shortcut felt like relief. You weren't pushing forward. You were surviving in place. And the game made sure you felt that. You couldn't carry much. You couldn't pick everything up. You couldn't just be prepared. Every decision had weight. Do I take the key or the ammo? Do I heal or save it? Do I run past this thing and hope it doesn't grab me? At the time, those weren't strategic choices. They were panic. I didn't understand optimal play. I didn't know about routing. I didn't know which enemies could be avoided. I just knew that if I made the wrong decision, I might not make it back. And because save rooms were spread so far apart, even success carried tension. Saving wasn't comfort, it was relief. Ink ribbons weren't a mechanic, they were permission. Permission to breathe, permission to stop, and the mansion punished confidence. Just when you started to feel like you understood one part of it, the game would change the rules. Enemies moved faster, new threats appeared, routes that felt safe stopped being safe. Suddenly, the map in your head didn't work anymore. That's when the mansion stopped feeling like a location and started feeling like an antagonist. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. The game wasn't trying to confuse you, it was teaching you caution. Every unlocked door expanded the world slightly. Every shortcut made survival feel possible. Every mistake made you rethink everything. And because all of this happens without tutorials, without hand-holding, without reassurance, the mansion felt enormous. Not because of its size, but because of how much it demanded from you. This wasn't a level you passed through. This was a place you had to learn, and learning it felt like earning it. For a while, Resident Evil wasn't something I played, it was something I watched. I'd sit in my brother's room, half hidden behind a pillow, watching him move through the mansion while I pretended I wasn't scared. I was scared, but I didn't want to miss anything. Watching felt safer. Someone else was in control, someone else made the mistakes. And when things went wrong, it wasn't my fault. Actually playing it was different. I remember the first times I played properly. Early in the morning, when everyone else was still asleep, sat on the floor, controller cable stretched tight, too far from the sofa to feel comfortable. The house was quiet, too quiet, and suddenly all that fear didn't disappear, it moved. When you're watching, fear is passive. When you're playing, it's your problem. If I ran the wrong way, that was on me. If I wasted ammo, that was on me. If I saved in the wrong place, that was on me. And there was no underdoing it. I didn't know the mansion yet. I didn't know which rooms were safe. I didn't know what was hiding behind the next door. Every camera angle felt like a gamble. Walking slowly around corners wasn't strategy, it was instinct. Sometimes I'd pause the game, not because I needed a break, but because I needed to breathe. And sometimes I'd just wait for my brother to wake up, wait for help, wait for someone older to deal with whatever I knew was coming next. I remember doing that with Yawn. I knew that room, I'd seen it before, I knew what was in there. And when I finally walked in myself, I couldn't take another step. So I paused the game and I waited, not because the game told me to, because I couldn't handle it yet. There was something Resident Evil did that I didn't realise until much later. It let you stop, not in a menu sense, not in a friendly way, but in a way that said, this is as far as you're comfortable going right now. And that mattered, because when I came back, when I finally pushed through, it felt earned. Fear didn't vanish, it changed shape. It stopped being something that happened to me and became something I had to manage. And that's when Resident Evil stopped being just frightening and started teaching me how to play. I didn't finish Resident Evil the first time I played it. Not properly. I don't remember the credits. I don't remember a clean ending. What I remember is the moment the game stopped feeling survivable. Not because of one big mistake, but because of lots of small ones. Ammo used when it didn't need to be. Healing taken too early. Doors opened without knowing what was behind them. The game never corrected me. It didn't flash warnings, it didn't adjust the difficulty, it didn't step in and rescue the player, it just let the consequences stack up, and then it changed shape. You leave the mansion, or at least you think you do, and suddenly you're somewhere else entirely. Water, dark corridors, tanks, movement slowed down, and sharks. At 6 years old, this wasn't a genre twist. It was betrayal. The game had already taught me that space mattered, and that positioning mattered, that getting cornered was deadly. Now it put me somewhere I couldn't move properly with something bigger than me circling. I know now that all you really have to do is run, get through the door, let the sharks disappear the moment the loading screen hits. But that isn't how a 6-year-old brain works. At that age, the water didn't feel like a mechanic, it felt like a trap. I wasn't thinking about exits, I wasn't thinking about systems, I was thinking about being stuck and something knowing it. That section didn't scare me because it was hard, it scared me because it felt unfair. And then, just when you think you've survived that, the game does something worse. It brings you back to the mansion, back to the place you thought you understood. Only now, it's different. That's when the hunters arrive. Fast, loud, aggressive. Up until that point, Resident Evil teaches you caution. The hunters punish hesitation. They don't shuffle. They don't wait. They close the distance immediately. One bad angle, one mistimed turn, and suddenly your character is gone. No dramatic build-up, no second chance, just consequence. That was the point where my confidence collapsed. The routes that I thought I knew weren't safe anymore. The decisions I'd been making no longer worked. And the game didn't acknowledge that shift at all. It didn't announce a new phase. It didn't warn me. It just expected me to keep up. I remember reaching a point where I knew I couldn't fix it. Low health, low ammo, no clear memory of the safest route back. I hadn't just made mistakes, I'd built them up into the save file. So I stopped, not angrily, not dramatically. I just paused, turned the console off, and walked away. That mattered, because this was the first game I remember that didn't care whether I finished it or not. It didn't soften itself, it didn't meet me halfway. It simply existed and waited. When I came back, I was a little older, not by years, but by understanding. I slowed down, I planned the routes, I stopped treating every enemy like a test. I learned when to fight, and more importantly, when not to. And suddenly, the game opened up again, not because it changed, but because I did. That first failed run wasn't wasted time, it was a lesson. Resident Evil didn't teach me how to win, it taught me how to retreat and come back better. I didn't really understand what director's cut meant when I first saw it. There was no internet to check, no breakdown videos, no one explaining what had changed. It was just Resident Evil again, but it felt heavier, like it was asking me to come back with a bit more intention. By this point, Resident Evil 2 was starting to loom, trailers were appearing, the police station was being talked about like it was a real place. It felt like the series was about to move on without me, so I knew I needed to finish this one properly. This time, I picked Jill again, because even back then, I knew the truth. Jill is the easier route, more item space, more breathing room, more forgiveness. And on that first proper completion, nothing felt dramatically different. The mansion played out as I remembered. I finally made it all the way through. You reach the end, you step out into the daylight. For a brief second, it feels like you've escaped, and then the tyrant appears. Not in rain, not in darkness, but in that false sense of safety. That moment stuck with me because it sums up the whole experience. Resident Evil never lets you leave cleanly. Only after that did I realise something important. There were options I hadn't touched, modes I hadn't tested, ways to play I hadn't even noticed yet. So I went back in, advanced mode, Chris Redfield, and everything fell apart again. Less item space, less ammo, more enemies. No Barry to step in when things went wrong. It was the same mansion, but it wasn't the same game. All the comfort I'd built up vanished. Every decision mattered again. Every mistake carried weight. And I remember thinking, oh, I was wrong. Not about being scared, about thinking I'd mastered it. Chris didn't just make the game harder, he forced a different mindset. You couldn't carry safety with you. You had to plan ahead. You had to know where you were going before you moved. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a game you finished once. It wasn't even a game you finished twice. It was something you learned. And if I'm being honest, part of the reason I pushed through this time wasn't just pride, it was anticipation. The director's cut came with the Resident Evil 2 demo disc. A glimpse of where it was heading, the police station, the city, the bigger scale. It felt like a warning. Finish this now, or you're not ready for what's coming next. And that pressure worked, because once you finish Resident Evil properly, you realise something important. You can beat it and still not really know it. Different characters, different endings, different paths through the same space. The game never tells you what the right way is. It just watches what you do and responds.
It's too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
At some point, Resident Evil stopped being scary. Not all at once, not dramatically. It just softened. The mansion stopped feeling hostile and started feeling familiar, like a place I knew too well. I didn't notice when it happened. I just realised one day that my hands were moving ahead of my thoughts. I knew which door to open first. I knew which zombies to avoid. I knew exactly how much ammo I could afford to spend in each room. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was remembering. That's when fear stopped being loud and started being familiar. And that's a strange thing to feel about a game that once gave you nightmares. Now I can play the original Resident Evil almost on autopilot, on a handheld, in short bursts, on breaks, with half my attention elsewhere. It takes me about an hour to reach the end, sometimes less. That sounds like I've stripped something away, but I don't think I have. I think I've carried it forward, because every time I move through that mansion now, there's still an echo of what it used to be. I remember being 6, sat on the floor, controller cable stretched too far, heart racing every time the camera angle changed. I remember not knowing if it was safe, not knowing if I was ready, not knowing if I could do it without help. And even though my hands know the routes now, that feeling hasn't completely disappeared. It's just quieter. Resident Evil became comfort, not because it lost its edge, but because I grew up around it. It didn't chase me as I got older. It stayed exactly where it was. I'm the one who changed, and that's why I still come back to it. Not to be scared, not to prove anything, but to revisit a moment where a game demanded more from me than I thought I could give, and trusted that I'd eventually rise to it. That's a rare relationship to have with anything, let alone a PlayStation 1 disc.
What?
What's strange about Resident Evil is that it never really went away. A lot of PlayStation 1 games live in memory. They sit where they landed. They're revisited, celebrated, and then gently put back on the shelf. Resident Evil didn't do that. It kept moving. Sequels came quickly, bigger, louder, more ambitious, sometimes better, sometimes not. But no matter how far the series travelled, everything always curved back towards this place. The mansion, the doors, the camera angles, the limits. Even when games changed completely, this one stayed relevant. People didn't just remember it, they measured everything against it. And part of the reason is simple, it never locked you into one experience. You could come back as Jill or Chris and feel like you were playing a different game. Different limits, different pressure, different mistakes. You could finish it and still not feel finished. The director's cut didn't replace the original, it challenged it. It asked you to go again, but with fewer safety nets. The remake didn't erase the past. It proved the design still worked, that the pacing, the tension, the restraint was still strong enough to survive better hardware. And even now, decades later, people keep finding ways back in. Handheld ports, fan mods, balance tweaks, small changes made by people who just want to feel that space again from a slightly different angle. Not because they have to, but because they want to. They just want to capture that moment again. That's not content, that's longevity. Resident Evil didn't age well because we're forgiven. It aged well because it was deliberate. Every restriction had a purpose. Every limitation created tension. Every pause gave your brain time to panic. That philosophy didn't stay in 1996. You can see it echoing forward in survival horror, in modern games that slow the player down on purpose. Not jump scares, not noise, pressure, uncertainty, the feeling that you're never quite ready. That started here, and the fact that this game is still being played, still being discussed, still being rebuilt says everything. This wasn't just a successful game, it was a foundation. There are a lot of great games on the PlayStation 1. Games that impress me, games that entertain me, games that still hold up in clever, surprising ways. Resident Evil is something else. This isn't just a game I like, it's a game that arrived at the exact moment I was ready to be changed by one. It didn't teach me speed, it didn't teach me power, it taught me restraint, it taught me that fear could be slow, that silence could matter, that progress didn't need to be loud to feel meaningful. It taught me that games could ask more of you than you thought you had, and trust you that you'd eventually rise to it. That's why this one never left. Not because it was perfect, not because it was the first, but because it respected the player enough to let them fail, walk away, and come back better. And now, nearly 30 years later, sitting here documenting this library one disc at a time, it feels right to stop here and acknowledge it. Not nostalgia, not as a myth, but as foundation. Index entries 41 and 42, Resident Evil and Resident Evil Director's Cut are complete. That brings the PSX index to 42 games down, 1,236 to go. And while this is where Resident Evil begins, it isn't where this kind of horror ends, because next, the index steps sideways, out of locked mansions and into city streets, out of survival horror and into something colder, stranger, more internal, a different kind of fear where menus matter as much as monsters, and numbers are just as dangerous as bullets. Next time on the PSX Index, Parasite Eve. This has been Parasine. The index continues.
Chill. This house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!